And now for his thoughts, let's turn to distinguished professor at Touro University, Thane Rosenbaum. Thane, always great to have you with us. Your take on these tax records. Is it just to embarrass the former president? Are they fishing, as the former president believes they are?
So, Katrina, the lawyers for the House Oversight Committee basically argued for the Supreme Court. Can you give us a break? Our term is coming to an end, right? We've been trying to get this going for a long, long time, and we have never had any access to the president's tax returns. So we're up against the clock. The appellate courts did not protect the president, and so the president immediately went to the Supreme Court and said essentially what you and Bob are saying, like, this seems to be political in nature and not investigative. Investigative has to be, Katrina and Bob, for a legislative purpose, a legitimate legislative purpose. Is the House Oversight Committee engaged in some legislation somewhere? So as you and the former Senator Santorum just said, well, the argument is that there's some proposed legislation in connection with the Treasury Department to try to understand how we would audit the tax returns of a United States president. We really don't know how to do it. Now, does that sound like a legitimate legislative purpose? It doesn't sound urgent. They never had this legislation before. So there's the Oversight Committee saying, look, we're in the business of investigation, and we're in the business of proposed legislation, and we might one day have such legislation. In the meantime, can we see Donald Trump's tax returns? The former president saying, oh, come on, this is just another example of the harassment that I've received, right? Last week, it was the appointment of a special prosecutor, a special counsel. This week, as the congressional term comes to an end, the Oversight Committee is going to get one last shot at my presidential tax returns for a politically motivated reason and not for a legislative motivated reason. Yeah. And that's really where it came down to.
Yeah. When I was in your class last week, you mentioned something about separation of powers. And I don't know if it matters now that Mr. Trump is no longer in power, because the idea of the judicial branch saying that the legislative branch could get information from the executive branch, but now that's not a pure argument since Mr. Trump is no longer in as president.
Although, the argument being the years in which I was president might actually receive an exemption, right? Because those years were protected by executive privilege and other immunities that would attain to the president himself. You're right. Generally speaking, if he were still the president, the separation of powers argument would be a strong one. But Bob, as you know from class last week, the argument continues to be that, what's the essential purpose here, right? I mean, what is it that Congress is really seeking? Separation of powers operates when the president is in power. It's true that the government is entitled to get anyone's tax return. But remember, President Trump has always made this argument. I'm just not an ordinary citizen. As the president of the United States, I'm supposed to be given certain courtesies and certain kinds of protections in order for me to do my job properly when I was the president. We saw that even in the discussion we had last week with the special counsel. The Justice Department's argument is President Trump should be treated like every single citizen in the United States. And a federal judge in Florida said, no, actually, he's in a league of his own. And so that idea for the both of you, we're going to see this again and again. I guarantee you, the Supreme Court is going to get a look at this idea. Is the president of the United States, even when he's no longer the president, is he a regular or she a regular citizen like the rest of us? Mm-hmm. Or is she being held to a different standard of protection in order for the president to do their job properly while they're in office? The Supreme Court has never really reconciled that. And you're seeing this is coming up again and again and again. And I have a feeling that the Supreme Court will hear it. One last thing. The Supreme Court, everyone talks about Donald Trump appointing 3 of the justices, a third of the justices. You can make the argument that they were favorable to him on the big ticket items, right, when it comes to things like abortion and affirmative action. But when it came to lesser procedural things, like a few months ago when he tried to get the the special master to not review the classified documents. And the Supreme Court said, no, the special master can look at the classified documents. So they have ruled against him lately.
Yeah, and Clarence Thomas didn't save him. He had reached out directly to him, the justice, because he was in that district. But
and one would have thought that he would have protected him, and he didn't.
Yeah.
So it's important to keep in mind that you win one and you lose one. In this case, the president has lost a few procedurally, even with justices that are known as conservatives.
Okay. Thane Rosenbaum, thank you, Professor. We appreciate it.
Anytime for you both.
I was assuming that will be on the final exam.
Yeah.
With Professor Rosenbaum.
Yeah, we better ask.
I took some notes. Well,
Yeah.
I was going to, but
I don't think we're ever going to get to the final exam. You know, seems like these go on forever.
I know.
Don't they?
I know.
All right. All I want for Christmas is Spam figgy pudding.